Value Impulses, the podcast for potential development by and with Uli Vogel. A very warm welcome, dear listeners, to today's episode. And I have a wonderful guest here. I have Tamara Dietl today, who has accepted my invitation. I'm very happy that she's joining us in this episode today. Hello, dear Tamara.
Hello, dear Uli. I'm also happy to be here.
Great, Tamara. We usually start like this. My team always puts together a few facts for my guest, and I always chuckle a bit because I know most of my guests quite well, and I've known you for ages now. I don't even know exactly how long, but I'd say I'd go back to the year 2012, or something like that.
It was 12.
Exactly, where you were introduced to me ultimately through Karl-Heinz Illner, and we then also with Bertram Casper together, who also got to know me through you. I spoke with him yesterday. Yes, did the first training sessions on profiling values. And that's how I met you, and then today I naturally.
If I may correct you briefly.
Yes.
We met, actually, during my meaning and values coaching training, which I attended with Ralph Schleiper-Damrich.
Yes, exactly.
And back then you were quite a fresh bait, profiling values missionary presenting your tool. And that fascinated me so much that I immediately did the training. It was one of the very first training sessions I did with you.
Exactly, one of the first certifications. And I remember that I was quite nervous about being allowed into this illustrious circle. And it was also really exciting. I don't remember now, was it in Frankfurt or was it in Munich? I'm not quite.
No, we had a convention with all the graduates of this meaning and values coaching training somewhere in the countryside.
Yes.
And we were there for 2 days. And you joined us for half a day. And you were a bit nervous, especially because it was all so new to you back then. And they were relatively high-profile people back then.
Yes.
But you left such a good impression, at least on me, that I immediately decided to do the certification.
Exactly. Yes, great. So, I probably grew quite a bit, so to speak, from the challenge, and it was very, very nice that you then also came to the training. And today I also pulled your book right off the shelf, The Power Lies Within Me. I'm very proud of your dedication, which is from December 2015. I read it back then with very, very great interest, and there's also some autobiographical stuff in there. That's when I learned that you come from Hamburg, that you did your traineeship at the Morgenpost. And then very successfully in journalism, also at Spiegel TV and all those things. Yeah, but ultimately, in the field of business coaching. Yeah, today you're very, very active and working at a really, really high level. So you know about all sorts of different areas and industries, And you come from a very specific background. I'm always a bit interested, Tamara, in the why people made certain decisions in their lives, the paths they've taken. And journalism is something fascinating. But many people also tell you when you're young, well, watch out, it's unprofitable, and whatever else. What was it? What was it that drove you back then? What was the why behind that career decision?
Well, it was a coincidence. It wasn't a conscious why decision, it was just a coincidence. And just like many things in my life were a coincidence. Although I think that over the decades I've learned to recognize coincidences and possibilities as opportunities. So on one hand, it's that something, so to speak, happens to you or you have an experience or something occurs. The coincidence happens, and then the question is, what do I do with it? And regarding journalism, I actually didn't want to do that at all. And then, at the end of my internship, a 3-week internship, as a young girl, I was sent to court to fill in for the court reporter who was sick at the time. And I found that so exciting that I then decided, this is my profession, this will be my career. I want to be a court reporter, and for that, I had to do the training. And I also, I somehow pursued that with great consistency, and then I did it. And when I look back today on my more than 40 years of professional life, then I can actually see that something connects these coincidences, including these different professions, that a common thread actually runs through my curiosity about the mystery of being human. Whether I'm doing that now as a coach or as a journalist or as an author or publicist. That's, I think, what drives me most, so my why is understanding people. And that's the first step. That's my wonderful dog now. You shut your trap now.
It's nice that we have that kind of company too.
Yeah, that I want to understand people as a first step. And then, of course, I always want to contribute somehow to helping people too. And there I would say journalism was more my profession, because it's, so to speak, something not quite as concrete and direct. It's more of an indirect impact. And through articles you write, or interviews you conduct, or films. I've also made many documentary films and so on. It reaches a large audience, of course. But the direct helping, supporting, shaping, also shaping relationships. I only found that in its passionate and concrete form through my coaching.
Amazing.
And that's why I always say, well, journalism was the profession. Or it still is the profession. I still write a lot of columns and such. And coaching, especially meaning and values coaching after Viktor Frankl, that's my calling.
Yes. Yes. So, the human at the center, that also connects us with the uniqueness that Robert S. Hartman always sees in every person, the cosmic event, so to speak, the singularity that each of us is. But in journalism, it's just, well, you said at the beginning, more investigative, I'd say. So, the understanding, digging in, drilling down, I can still remember it well. When we were at your apartment and you were advising me. And back then, I wanted to study Hartman closely and maybe write a biography and so on, then you really opened my eyes to everything I'd have to do and how deep I'd have to dig into the archives. And until I'd be somehow really well-versed enough to be able to say anything. I found that impressive. I ended up leaving it, by the way.
So, okay, did I?
Well,
scare you a little bit with?
No. You enlightened me professionally, right then and there. And of course, if I ever have a lot of time, I could still imagine doing it. But I'm an entrepreneur in the sense that, just like you, I want to help people. With the method that originally comes from Hartman, the Hartman value profile, and what I then further developed in profiling values. And I have to put all my energy into that to be able to set a brand somewhere as a system provider and to establish that in the market. That doesn't really go along with it, so to speak. But you too, in the second profession, let's just call it that, which you have in consulting, in coaching, and so on. Yes, not only learned, but also practice wonderfully in various places. We do keep exchanging ideas. But there was also an excursion with Fredmund Malik, I recall somewhere. How did you, so to speak, record that for yourself, or what did it bring, or maybe you have a few sentences for us?
Yes. Yes, that was also a coincidence again.
Amazing.
Oh, I had a female board member whom I supported during a transition from one company to another, and who then took over and built up a corporate publishing project for a large German publisher. And in that context, she was looking for journalists who, for an annual report of one of the largest, I think even the largest Austrian DAX company.
Yes.
They were supposed to. It was sort of when corporate publishing was starting that people said, well, an annual report is more than just dry numbers. It has to be presented well somehow.
Yes.
And among other things, the board at the time wanted Fredmund Malik to be interviewed on the topic of HR and personnel development and management. And she couldn't find anyone in the German journalism scene who was familiar with this HR topic.
Ah, okay.
And she had found many, well, from Zeit, Süddeutsche, Spiegel, well-known journalists who covered all these other areas. And at some point she was in coaching and said, "Look, I can't find anyone. No one has a clue about it, and you once did journalism. Would you feel up to doing that? Because you know about personnel development and coaching and leadership development and management, so to speak." And then I thought, well, why not? And I had also, so to speak, gotten to know his writings during my training. So in that sense I was also a fan, not 100%, but in many things, one has to say, he was a real visionary. And then I said, I can give it a try. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? And then I went to St. Gallen and did this interview with him. And as I was leaving and we were saying goodbye, he said, "Ms. Dietl, I think we'll meet again. I could well imagine you working for me."
Aha, okay.
And then I just gulped and thought, ooh, okay, yeah, well, we can talk again. And then we kept in touch. And then for quite a long time, and well, he kept insisting, so to speak, and then at some point I thought, I'll do it, and I spent almost 2.5 years working very closely with him, coaching and also revising some of his books and so on. It was a really great time. I learned an incredible amount. Especially in the management segment. I mean, he was really there with his tools too, with his agile tools, well, at a time when digitalization and agility, a keyword VUCA, when all that. We're talking here, I think, I worked for him from 2013 to 2015. And back then, none of that was common sense yet, so to speak, but it was just emerging. And he was miles ahead with some really great mandates. And that was, well, it was a really great time. And I just, well, thanks to coincidence, I just learned an insane amount, yeah.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, let's pivot now to the topic of crisis. You already mentioned Viktor Frankl, and he's very well known for his publications. And he was, by the way, as we discussed, a contemporary of Robert S. Hartman. They actually met at 2 conferences in total and considered working together. And ultimately, one of Frankl's research groups back then in Mexico worked with a group of Hartmans. And they actually contributed somewhat to the development of the Hartman value profile. So there's actually quite a bit there in that history. But, crisis, yeah, Frankl's story is very easy to relate to, but you're also very competent in that area, and in your book I just mentioned, The Power Lies Within Me, you describe 2 crises, or rather 2 illnesses of loved ones, and you've grown a lot through that, I think, and today you work very, very extensively on the topic of crisis. So maybe you could elaborate a bit more on this focus on crisis, and then we can perhaps look at today's crises from both a macro and a micro perspective.
Well, to be honest with you, that wasn't really my initial, my why specializing in crisis with meaning and values coaching. It evolved during my collaboration with Ralph Schleiper-Damrich. We developed it to the point where we said that crisis competence is actually becoming increasingly important.
Yeah.
Given the changes in the world in terms of time compression, the increased pace, and above all, exponential growth and development, the increase in complexity. And yeah, we even created a whole concept and trained colleagues in crisis coaching. And yeah, looking back today, I'd say we were ahead of our time.
Yeah, you could say that.
If one can put it that way. Then having to apply this crisis competence myself, so to speak, in my own life, due to the cancer diagnoses of my husband and my mother. That was, well, that's just part of the story now, but what I'm really, really concerned with here is, yeah, maybe you could even say it's moving towards resilience.
And,
However you want to word it, like when I first started out with crisis coaching, the term crisis wasn't at all, well, I'd almost say it's used excessively today.
yeah,
But whether we call it resilience or crisis competence, at its core, break time equals 0.5s/, it's about achieving certain outcomes. Developing skills that you can actually learn in order to successfully break time equals 0.5s/, navigate and deal with situations that are in a state of crisis.
oh no,
We're coming from a time where the world, and by we I mean our generation, I was born in 1964. I'll be, oh God, in 2 weeks. Yeah, in 2 weeks I'll be 60, so. We come from a time when things weren't as crisis-ridden as they are right now. I think we, and by we I mean here, the Western North, yeah, so it's limited.
oh no,
But for quite a long time, things really were looking up for us, and with such great prosperity. There was a life situation that was relatively stable. And humans tend to succumb to the misconception, to put it that way, in phases of great stability, that stable conditions will just continue forever. And that this is, so to speak, really just the norm, the usual state of things, when the truth is that instability, in fact, is actually more common than we might think. Is the norm. And that's what we're facing at this moment, on so many different levels. Break time equals 0.5s/, on a geopolitical level, on a medical and health level, especially with the pandemic, but also on a socio-political level right here in Germany, regarding our democracy. That's quite a major challenge. And I think we can definitely learn quite a lot from Frankl by adopting the well-known and influential shift in perspective that Frankl developed as the very core of his teachings on meaning. Namely, he says that we shouldn't, so to speak, ask questions of life and expect life to serve us what we'd like on a silver platter. Rather, we are the ones being questioned by life. Life poses the questions to us, and it is up to us to provide our answers to what life asks of us. And from this, Frankl derives that by being called to give an answer, I take responsibility for my life. And I assume responsibility for my life, but also for, so to speak, for the community as well. And that is a high ethical, well, a wonderful ethical. A calling, one might say, a summons, yes. To realize that life isn't simply, not just there in a hedonistic sense. For me to feel good and strive for that, but rather that I am good for something. And when I am that, then I also feel good. Which doesn't mean in the sense of just have fun, but rather there is another form of satisfaction and a fulfilling life.
yes, that is also the term that Hartmann often picks up on. And I mean, it is simply illogical to believe that the universe should revolve around what my desires are. But situations are what they are, and then I have to, so to speak, get the best out of myself and the community. After all, we are the pack animals that have to manage this, and not just for ourselves. Yes, achieve satisfaction, but rather with others. And I recently spoke with Peter Schaffel, also someone I have worked with closely for a long time. Born in 61, you said 64 for you. I was born in 67. Yeah, who kind of said, well, maybe we are the generation that hit the sweet spot a bit, growing up. Sure, during the Cold War, I was also in the armed forces and so on, but there was a certain form of stability. The economy was always on the rise and then. From 89, 90, the peace dividend. And then quite a long time now. Sure, there is always one crisis or another, but not so geopolitically existential or even dangerous. And you do get sluggish then. And with the crisis coaching, you were indeed ahead of your time. And now, when we look at the stacked or polycrises, when you look at it, I am of the opinion, looking at my clients, and I will ask you in a moment, and listen in, that resilience has increased. You gave a truly wonderful talk a few years ago for a client of mine at a leadership offsite where many people from all over the world were present, and you spoke very specifically about resilience. I do believe that many people here have grown and developed quite well from it over time, but of course, a lot of damage has also occurred in many different places. And when you listen to your client companies today, what are, from your perspective, the consequences of this immense pressure? Which, through geopolitics, and of course the pandemic was there before too, and then considering the economic impacts and uncertainties that naturally arise, not just in supply chains, but in everything, really. I mean, forecasts are basically obsolete the moment you even voice them. As a consultant for crisis situations, what have been your experiences lately?
Well, I work in top executive management. And I have to say, I'm already noticing how should I put this? I'm seeing that even my top people are sometimes sitting here saying, I'm reaching my limits.
MHM.
And it's well, I don't envy anyone right now, whether in politics or in business, for this leadership responsibility. I really have to say that, and I'm doing my best. And it's working quite well to keep stabilizing and strengthening things with the tools. But it's work, it's real work, and it's also a lot of work on myself, so.
MHM.
Not just as Tamara, but as a leader.
Yes.
That and having to endure a lot, cushioning a lot externally and internally. You really need a thick skin right now, and I recently told a client here that leaders are only human too. That might sound a bit cliché, but in times like these, it's something that you have to keep reminding yourself of. And I think that I'm also working on a new book about crises, but not so much about personal ones, but rather these multiple crises. And I've been looking into this very intensely over the last few months. What kind of crisis competencies are actually important or what we need. And I truly believe that a key competency, especially for the times we're living in right now, is ambivalence competency.
MHM.
Meaning learning how to deal with ambivalences and to endure them. And we're not used to that. We were used to being able to make decisions between right and wrong, to being able to decide what's good and what's bad. Yeah, and then we are our beliefs, our worldview, our perspective on humanity, that's being quite strained. Break time equals 0.5s / in terms of how things are going. Can I orient myself so as my coordinate system, in which I've acted so far, is that still appropriate for the situation we are in right now? Or do I need new coordinate systems, and maybe even ones that no longer have these clear axes? And to endure that and to balance that out, I notice that personally too, when I look at the world and bring myself into resonance with what's happening out there, then I notice that I very strongly, yet to also so to speak, to also not give up hope, to also give my optimism some space, to keep saying, I am neither powerless, but I'm also just not almighty. MHM. And in this tension, we move. And to find the balance there and to give the best, and at the same time also give the best to myself. So bringing that back to my clients, I notice that the more complex the world becomes, and that's at the moment, so the complexity, I believe there's never been a phase in human history of such incredible complexity. Which of course also has a lot to do with technology, with digitalization, and with this compression of time. So this no more gaps in time, from the time we come from. So we were socialized for half our lives in the analog era. Yeah. Yeah, we always had to wait. Yeah, there were always gaps. We had to wait for the letter to arrive. We had to wait for the phone to ring. We had to wait for the news in the end. We live in a media real-time world. And that increases complexity in a league where I often say, or also notice, that the soul remains a pedestrian. MHM. That we, so to speak, this evolu as humans can't even keep up with this evolutionary step yet. It's all going way too fast. And that's why the requirement for my clients, or what we're trying to do, is, so to speak, very consciously, precisely because it's so complex, precisely because it has such an incredible pace that we're experiencing right now, to hit the stop button. So the pausing. Here I interesting also my coaching sessions have so I don't do any coaching under 3 hours anymore. MHM. To create a space where we can pause, reflect, yes, also on our values, on what we actually set out to do. And this space and this time that we must take for ourselves, especially when we are in a position of responsibility, to stay grounded. And so to speak, to still be able to act consciously, to give our answers to what life is currently offering us. And no longer fall into an effective reaction mode. That is what I strongly, work out in the work. And also provide this space. And that is what is incredibly important at the moment. So also that a leader also looks after themselves and doesn't just pant after this development breathlessly and without pause. Did I express myself? Is that too abstract now?
No, not at all. Well, you've swung back and forth quite well between the abstract and the concrete, and related it back to the leader. I mean, I've had similar experiences in recent years with my training and coaching as well. You also mentioned the ever-increasing complexity. Yves Moore, you also investigated this very, very well, that from 1955 to 2010. Yes, the factor of complexity, as far as the demands on companies are concerned, from the customer side, from the product side, from all sorts of things, the service side, has reached sevenfold, so to speak. But if you consider how people in companies have reacted to it, namely by starting to overcomplicate things, then this complication index was multiplied 35 times. So, we humans are, so to speak, equipped with something analog and then react to this complexity. In a way with a pattern, let's say from the